India is one of the largest pharma exporters in the world, especially since the pandemic. We have emerged as a crucial drug manufacturer for the world. But a very serious incident that has come out from Gambia can cast a shadow on the entire sector. The WHO has issued a warning that 4 cough syrups made by Indian pharmaceutical company Maiden Pharma in Haryana could be linked to the death of 66 children in Gambia. Authorities in India are now investigating the matter after it was flagged off by the WHO. The Gambian government is undertaking a door-to-door recall of this, and the Indian government has also said that these cough syrups were not being sold locally in the country. Now, while the hunt for a direct link to prove that the deaths were because of the cough syrup are being undertaken, the World Health Body has, as of now, found evidence that the cough syrups were contaminated with toxins that could prove fatal to children. In fact, a lot of these children died of renal failure. Indian authorities have said that the drugs in question were not sold here, but such tragedies have occurred in the past. There are reports now emerging that in Gurugram, 26 children died after consuming a contaminated syrup, while 10 children died in Jammu in 2020. So what exactly has happened, and has this really raised some very, very serious questions on the way the pharma sector is regulated in the country? To speak more on this, I'm joined today by Professor Ramanan Laxminarayan. He's Senior Research Scholar at Princeton University. Murali, Neelakantan, former General Counsel at Cipla and Glenmark. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for speaking with us on the India development debate. Murali, Neelakantan, let me just begin with your take. I mean, as of now, the Indian government has asked for proof, and that proof will be sought about where is the direct link. But the truly scary part of the story is that can we truly assume that this has not happened in the past, and specifically this contamination by diethylene glycol and ethylene glycol in pediatric cough syrups has not happened in the past?
Actually, we shouldn't assume. We know that it has happened in the past. So we have several examples of this, stretching all the way back to 1973. So we have at least 50 years of evidence that DEG is fatal. It's found in cough syrups. So there is no assumption to be made. We also know how DEG comes into the product. So again, it shouldn't be a surprise. We have tests for identifying DEG in products. So again, not a surprise. So none of this should be a surprise. We know it's dangerous, it's fatal. We know how to find it. We know how to identify it in the process or in the raw materials. And it has been identified and known to be fatal. Therefore, there are advisories on it. So there's absolutely no reason for this to happen at all, at least 50 years after we know that it is fatal.
No, so to explain to all of our viewers, lay people, how this could have gotten into the cough syrups, is this, and I'm coming to Professor Ramanan with this, is this an oversight? Is this malice? Is this trying to cut corners? How exactly would a tragedy of this scale be allowed to be unleashed upon unsuspecting kids?
I was just saying that this problem in Africa exists both with drugs from India, but also those that are made in Vietnam and China as well. So it is a recurrent problem, and it's not a problem which just emerges in one place. There's probably demand for these drugs in other countries as well. So it's a whole range from people selling drugs that were expired. You know, they might have been expired a while ago, and someone decides to find a way to import it into a country. It's a very large and complex problem, Tamanna. So this is one glimpse of a problem that exists every day, really.
No, so not getting into too much of the details, but from what I'm understanding so far, and that's why I want the experts over here to shed some light in it, both of these contaminants, diethylene glycol and ethylene glycol, which can cause renal failure, look very similar to something called propylene glycol, which is a solvent that is required in pediatric cough syrups. So coming back to the question, Murali, because it's important to understand how this could have happened. If one starts from the assumption that no company company wants to put poison in their cough syrups, which will kill children all under the age of 5, and no one wants to perpetrate evil. So is this some of the reasons, some very lax standards in ensuring that there are no mix-ups, in ensuring that wrong ingredients are not put in? Is this from the side of the suppliers, from the traders? At what end does this leak need to be plugged?
There are enough processes in a good manufacturing plant to ensure that this never happens. So the process starts with raw materials that are purchased and come in will be tested. So we know beforehand that all the material that is being purchased meets the standard. We also look for certain impurities and certain contaminants. So again, we're able to stop it at a very early stage so that it doesn't get into the manufacturing process. Now, there are many ways to test it, and there are many kinds of tests that we do. First is for the ingredients themselves, but also we know if there is an ingredient that will subsequently cause a contaminant in the process, we will pick for that as well. So it could be that in the raw materials, the checking was not done properly. The second stage is in the mixing of it. So when the formulation is made, if you don't get the right quantity, if you're cutting corners somewhere and adding more of a cheaper ingredient and less of the active ingredient, then it can happen that during the process, because you've changed the formulation, you have contaminants coming in, or you have this product that suddenly emerges in the process. Finally, it could happen at the final stage of packing as well. So it's very difficult to say where it is generally that you have contaminants, but we know in this case from past examples that it happened at the stage of the raw materials. So someone decided for whatever reason that it was okay to be lax about testing raw materials. So it comes from the ingredients in the raw materials. It's unlikely that it was introduced subsequently during the manufacturing process. That's what we know from past. Now, we don't know what process this company uses, what controls they have, how often do they check. And in the worst case, there must be a testing at the time of a finished product. So at that time, they could easily have figured it out. So there are 3 stages. There are tests for each stage. There is no way this product ever left the factory. That's the easy way of answering the question.
So then let me ask even a more simpler question, which might not have a simple answer. Professor Ramanan, in this case, then who goofed up? Is it the company? Is it someone in the Indian medical bodies that needed to sign off on their capability of exporting? Is it the WHO, which needed to give some kind of guarantee? Is it the government of Gambia, which didn't put the right checks in place?
I would blame on both the company as well as on the regulatory bodies involved. Clearly, the company was able to get so far only because the regulation was really not, up to snuff. And that would be true to some extent, both on the Indian side as well as on the Gambian side, if this were really the case. So the government regulatory body should not have certified this drug at all. We should have, or the manufacturing process. We have, as well known, there's a lot of loopholes in these regulatory processes that allow companies to sort of go ahead and export their drug. And of course, the importing country typically does have some responsibility for checking as well. Large countries like the United States have maintained actual offices in India to check the quality of the drugs going from India to the US. A small country like the Gambia has no such capacity, so they probably don't do it. But this is a shared responsibility for sure.
Okay. Now the question of, and not to for even a second try and elude that, Indian lives matter more than Gambian lives, or, one set of lives matter more than the others. But I just want to come to the pertinent question for our viewers right now. Can we really breathe easy with the statement that these 4 cough syrups were never sold in India? If at the end of the day, the big hole seems to be in a process, and that process would be similar for what is sold in India, isn't it, Murali?
We don't know is the answer. What we do know is that a company selling products in 3 different sets of markets often uses different sets of ingredients and uses different processes. So if it is for let's say Western Europe and the United States, it will have a process to check the ingredients, a different process for manufacture, let's say a good process for manufacture, and a good quality control process. All that will be documented and they will follow that documented process. Then you have the less developed markets, for which obviously you can afford to be lax. And then you have the least developed markets, where effectively you can sell anything you like. We know this to be a fact, that there are companies making
I
a
find that
product
very
for 3 different
disturbing.
markets.
Murali, I'm sorry for interjecting, but I think we need to highlight and underline that point because Professor Ramanan made it earlier as well. I find that very disturbing. We are, you seem to be suggesting that in poor countries where they don't have much options and no ability to really test, their standards are lax, companies think that they can just sell anything, even if it costs lives of people.
Yes, and we know that there is no testing, any serious testing done for products in the Indian market. So it's not as if India is in the same level as the United States and Western Europe. We know that a vast majority of products are manufactured with a state license. We know that they are hardly ever inspected. We know that a lot of their processes are copy-paste documents, which no one follows. We know that they don't have good quality control. And we know that there's no consequence result of that either. So if products fail and they are known to have failed, the company doesn't actually suffer anything. Nobody shuts down the plant. Nobody puts those people in jail. Nothing happens here. Whereas if something similar were to happen for a plant that was exporting to the United States, and we've known examples of that, and it's not been this serious, and yet the plant's been shut down. I mean, I don't know how many of you will remember the Halol plant of Ranbaxy and the issues they had. The product was still fine, but the process was terrible. And therefore, for years on end, that plant couldn't produce a product to be exported to the United States. And that was even after Sun took it over. So that's the level of attention to detail that the US FDA expects, or the MHRA will expect, or the EMA will expect of manufacturers. That standard is, in that sense, the gold standard. For products to the less developed markets, the least developed markets, and for India, there is no such process required. There is no consequence of not following that process. And therefore, you can get away with it. If you can, why not? And that's the mentality here. We don't test enough. Even when we know it's a very bad product, when was the last time we had a recall? Never happens.
It seems like we're taking the lives of people for granted. Professor Ramanan, what is the reason for such lax standards? Is it also because our drugs, our medicines are very competitively priced?
No.
No, it's got, see, standards are a minimum criteria. You have to follow them. And then on top of that, you try to make the drug as cheaply as possible. Now, obviously, when people cut corners, and people do cut corners, then you lose out on some of the processes which affect the final product as well. Maybe not all the time, but at least some of the time, like has happened here. That's what processes make sure that 100% of the time you're going to get what you said you would make at the outset. And when you cut corners, you don't have that. Maybe 10, 20% you mess up and have something else, and you never really find that out. So you're right. It is a highly price competitive market. It certainly contributes to that. But all markets will be heavily price competitive and will be a race to the bottom if there is not a strong regulator. Now, the strong regulator is needed, has been argued for India for a long time. Actually, even if India didn't want to have that strong regulator domestically, the entire export market is put at risk by the actions of even one or two bad players. So large numbers because people just think of Indian pharma as one sort of composite sometimes. That's not obviously true. But then when that happens, everyone gets tarred with the same brush. And for that reason, having the regulatory process also there to give customers and purchasers peace of mind to say, what I'm buying is what they say they're selling to me. And for that reason itself, it is important for the regulatory oversight of pharma to be higher than it is now. And when that happens, it may increase some to the price pressures, but it will actually enable us to export far more pharmaceuticals than we're doing even now.
You know, this point about tarring everyone with the same brush, Murali, I think this is important because as I said in my introduction, the Indian pharmaceutical industry and its might for exports is well renowned. Can we, continue that kind of credibility, and aren't we harming that credibility if we let such incidents slide?
Yes, we do. And therefore, you will see this whole PR blast that we're expecting soon, where you will have IPA and the other industry bodies saying, don't tar everybody with the same brush. Look at the US FDA approved plants. We meet global standards. We export to the United States and to Europe. That is the standard. And that PR push comes in every time one of these instances happen elsewhere in the world. So when the ranitidine issue hit us, there were quick recalls from all of the exporters, brought back product from the United States. But we didn't see any of that in India. In fact, the Indian government didn't even bother with taking any action other than saying, please be careful. It still hasn't set out a standard for the carcinogenic impurity in ranitidine. So it's very nice to see a PR push, but the reality is that every time Indian companies want to enter new markets, or an Indian company which hasn't entered the US market wants to enter the US market, it'll be subject to great scrutiny. What I'm hoping will come out of this is that the Indian regulator will say that, hey, your US market is great, the Western European market is great, but we're going to suffer greatly in the rest of the world. And therefore, we need to do something about it. It's a matter where the Indian government is trying to help build relationships with the global South, and healthcare for all is really a good bandwagon to jump on. There are a few countries in the world like India which can help access to medicines and healthcare for all. And examples like these will hurt that messaging to say, we're India, we're going to help the rest of the world with healthcare. So I think that's where the government needs to be careful, and it should take this message very seriously. Otherwise, a lot of the countries will say no to Indian products. We've had issues like this in the past. It's been really an uphill task to build back that credibility and goodwill in the global South. And it matters. It matters to us because it's a huge market. We have great opportunities there, and we haven't really done very much of good at a large scale. Now is the opportunity.
And you're right about this whole push which will come to say that don't tar everyone with the same brush. Well, obviously, we're not saying that every medicine out there is potentially fatal. But if there has been such a huge lapse, it requires closer scrutiny and tough questions on what is the regulatory action that will follow. Your take on this, Professor Ramanan, where India does have the opportunity to be the pharmacy of the world, but no one's going to take that opportunity seriously until we crack down and seem to be cracking down on this horrific incident from Gambia.
I fully agree, and this is exactly what I said in my last comment as well, which is that it's important to make sure that there's a strong regulatory system that protects all companies. Regulations protect companies. However, some of the greatest resistance to the regulation also comes from the companies. So it's a two-edged sword. There is a benefit, but the people who will argue to keep that regulation might be the ones who anyway meet that regulation because they are exporting to high-paying customers. And the ones who are going to fight the regulation are the ones who know that they're going to fail the regulation. And this is the story of regulation in any sector, anywhere in the world, always. And the challenge is for the regulatory bodies to somehow find a way to put that regulation in place and still be able to, maybe some of the small manufacturers will be unhappy because they won't be able to meet the regulatory standard. But my worry is that if India does not do it today, it'll be even more difficult to do it 10 years from now, and even more difficult, 10 years from then. And we would have lost the opportunity if some other country suddenly decides. I mean, we now see Ireland being a great producer of biosimilars. We see, Belgium coming back into manufacturing. Singapore is always interested in manufacturing. So we could easily be knocked over by countries that are making drugs that purchasers see as safe and effective. And we have to remember that as the purchasing power of the global consumer goes up everywhere, including Africa, the African customers in 5 years from now will be far more demanding than the ones they are today. And 5 years from now, it is possible that if your products are not regularly up to standard, you'll just get thrown out. So I think we have to anticipate where this entire story is moving and move to get ourselves to that level of quality before we get thrown out of the way, because we've not yet done that work.
Well, if we want to push Make in India and we want to keep that flag flying high, we definitely have to clean up any lapses and plug those leaks as we go along, and I hope that strict action will follow. Thank you so much, Murali and Professor Ramanan, for joining us today.
Thank you.